So I'm Cheryl Dodwell. I'm the Executive Director of Peace of Mind, our nonprofit organization. And Linda and I founded this organization to support educators interested in mindfulness-based social and emotional learning and conflict resolution, and to move this work forward in our schools. We're glad to have at least one board member here today too. Liz, thanks for joining us. And thanks to everyone else for being here. Let me turn it over to Linda.
Yeah, hi, I'm Linda Ryden, and you already heard from me today if you were here earlier, but I'm the peace teacher at Lafayette Elementary School here in Washington, D.C., and I'm also the founder of Peace of Mind, and with Cheryl, we have our nonprofit and publish curriculum together. And we're really excited about sharing with you a little bit about what we do and follow up a little bit more on what I talked about earlier today. And we really, this format isn't great, because we can't see you and hear you. And so, but we'd love to hear from you in the chat. And if we don't get to your questions, we will try to follow up with you later. And if you're just joining, just put your name and where you're from in the chat, and a little bit about why you're here. It would be really great.
Thanks. Should we dive in?
I guess so. Yeah, we don't have tons of time, so I guess we'll dive in as people are coming in. All right, so I just wanted to give a little overview of what we're going to be talking about. I also wanted to point out that all the pictures in our slideshow are almost all, are pictures of students from that was my classroom. I haven't been in there in a long time, but those are real students from my classroom, so it makes me feel good to see their faces. So, like a lot of you, most of you, I'm sure, I'm still recovering from the experience of walking out of my classroom one day in March and a few days later finding out that my world had changed completely. And like all of you over the last few months, I did my best with distance learning. And now we're faced with the uncertainty of what comes next. But as we head into the fall, we know that attending to our students' social and emotional needs are going to be the most important thing that we do. And so today we're going to be talking about how mindfulness-based social emotional learning is an important tool for addressing the two pandemics that we're facing today, the COVID-19 and the pandemic of systemic racism. And that's a lot. This has all been a lot. So we thought maybe we would just take a moment and do a little bit of mindfulness. And if you've never done mindfulness before, please don't worry. It's not a big deal. So if you want to just, maybe put down, if you're holding anything, put it down. And if you feel comfortable, you could close your eyes, but you don't have to. And we're just gonna settle in a little bit. This is a practice that I do with my students a lot. It just helps us to feel a little bit more grounded and to just feels good to take a breath together. So we can just start, whether your eyes are closed or open, you can just start by noticing what you can see. And if your eyes are closed, you might be seeing lights or shapes or images. Just notice it. Just see if you can bring your attention to that. And then just move your attention to noticing what sounds you can hear. Either sounds from the room that you're in, or if you're wearing headphones, maybe the sounds that you hear from your computer, or even sounds from inside of your body, like the sound of swallowing. And then we'll just turn our attention to the feelings, the sensations that you have in your body. So just trying to notice, do you have a tingling feeling in your hands? Notice the temperature of the air on your skin. You might notice that you're hungry, tired. Just notice whatever sensations you can feel in your body. And then if you want to, let's just take a deep breath together. Just breathing in gently and breathing out gently. And if your eyes were closed, you can open them now. And if that was your first time doing mindfulness, that's basically it. We're just paying attention. So thanks for trying that with me. And if you want to, you can share in the chat what you were noticing or what that was like for you, especially if that's something that's new to you. So now we're going to just give you a little overview of Peace of Mind, which is the nonprofit that Cheryl and I started together. And I'm just going to give a little bit of the history of how we got there. So I'm the peace teacher at my elementary school, and that is a role that I created, and the title was given to me by my students. And I teach the Peace of Mind curriculum, which is a mindfulness-based social emotional curriculum that I created over the past 17 years. And I started out my program with a focus on conflict resolution, and I wasn't teaching mindfulness. I didn't really know very much about mindfulness back then. But after a few years of teaching conflict resolution, I just kind of felt like my students really weren't able to use the skills I was teaching them in the way that I thought they would. They would often say to me, you know, I was too angry and I couldn't remember what you said, and I couldn't think because I was so angry. And so I started to look for something to help with that. And what I found was mindfulness. And so I started to teach. I learned a little bit of mindfulness myself, and then I just dove in and started teaching really simple practices like the one that we just did with my students. And they loved it. And it really started to change the way they were able to access the conflict resolution skills. Then I learned a little bit about neuroscience from the work of Dr. Daniel Siegel. And I began to understand what happens in the brain when you get angry, and how mindfulness can help to calm the fight, flight, or freeze reflexes that take over when you're angry. So I started to use mindfulness and neuroscience as the foundation for everything that I was teaching in my peace classes, conflict resolution and the SEL lessons. And the difference was really noticeable. And over the course of a few years, it led to a pretty major improvement in our school climate. And then I'm just going to turn it over to Cheryl to sort of take the story from there.
The organization that we founded is really to support educators who are interested in doing this work at its core, and to support the students that they're working with. So we have created a series of core curricula and storybooks that both meet the needs of students in the classroom and also families at home. We provide support and training to our educators, including community of practice gatherings and an annual conference. Not sure what that will look like this year, but traditionally. Classroom resources, which really are we've developed in response to what educators have asked for, what they need in their classrooms. Sort of parent support is a fledgling area for us, but we're working there. And then advocacy and education feels extremely important, just to talk about basically all of the things that Linda shared with us in her keynote today as widely as we can. We have educators all over the country working with Peace of Mind, and 9 foreign countries as well. The things that we'd really like to lift up for you about our approach to this work, and what you'll be hearing more about today, are that mindfulness and neuroscience are really the essential foundations for effective conflict resolution and positive action. We don't, we can teach conflict resolution without them, and it'll be moderately helpful. But when kids can actually access these skills when they're needed because they've been practicing them, it's really revolutionary. Peace of mind is rooted in the classroom by educators for educators. Mindfulness, the way that we teach it, the way that we'll talk about it today, is as a secular brain training in a way, like a skill to put some space between our reaction to a situation and our response. It's not clearing the mind. We don't teach peace of mind as a behavior management tool, but it can lead to kinder classrooms. It can lead to benefits that lead to easier behavior in the classroom. The thing that we really feel passionate about is that peace of mind is teaching life skills to kids that they can use to increase their own sense of agency and well-being in the world. This is really why we do what we do and why we're all here.
Yeah, so so we wanted to start just a little bit by talking about how the mindfulness and brain science and SEL lessons have been really helpful during this time, during the quarantine and during the distance learning. I really when I started teaching distance learning sometime in March, it was really clear to me that what my kids needed more than anything else were these mindfulness skills to help them deal with the main challenges that they were having, which were things like worry and fear and sleeping problems, things like that. And so I didn't really have to change what I was teaching. I just had to change how I was teaching it. But we really just doubled down on the mindfulness practices because those were so useful for me personally and for my students and even for their parents, because I found that when I would be teaching my online peace class, parents would often kind of walk by and see their kids with their eyes closed, and they'd wonder what they were doing, and oftentimes they'd join in. I even had kids who dragged their parents with them to peace class and said, "My dad is too stressed out. He needs to do some mindful breathing," and so they would join in, which was really fun. So we were glad that we had those, that we'd already set the foundation of teaching the kids the practices that they could then use on their own. We also made lots and lots of videos that the kids could watch to be reminded of some of the practices. And all those videos are available on our website for free now for anybody who would like to use them. And so Cheryl's going to share one of the mindfulness practices that we use the most. I think it might be the most popular one among my students, called Take 5 Breathing.
This is a popular one. Actually, I'm going to introduce one of Linda's students named Alex, who's going to tell us a little bit about it. This is one of our favorite videos. So let me just put this on for you guys. And then we'll come back to it.
This is take 5, and it's number 3. And why it's number 3? It's the third easiest. And it also is really quick. So the way it works is basically you use your hand as a breathing counter. So you take a deep breath in and breathe out. And you can also do it like under your desk or something, and it can be a nice way to visualize yourself getting mindful and just get yourself into a more mindful state to do something that you want to do.
That's Alex. He's one of Linda's mindful mentors. So if you'd be willing, why don't we try it? He showed us how to do it, and let's just try it together if you'd like to take a minute. So just find a comfortable seat, however it works for you, and let's just breathe in and out, tracing your hand. Try it yourself. So breathe in, Going up, breathe out, going down. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. Just take a breath. This practice, I think kids love it for a few reasons. Like their hands are always with them. You always have what you need. But it's a way not only to calm your amygdala through the breathing practice, but also to reconnect with your body through the tracing of your hand. It's calming, it's always available, and it allows a child to shift from the sympathetic side of the nervous system back to the parasympathetic side of the nervous system, where your prefrontal cortex can come back online and you can make a good decision or settle in and focus on a task, whatever you need to do. So another tool for your toolbox. Let's just move on.
Yeah, and I noticed that Jessica in the chat said that she loves seeing the students explain it, and we really love that too. We think that having the kids teach other kids is really one of the most powerful ways of teaching mindfulness. And we have, back when we were in regular school, I had a large group of fifth graders who had been in my class for a long time. I teach my class, it's like a special, so it's like art, music, and PE. So I get to teach the same kids from first grade to fifth grade. So by fifth grade, they really know a lot about mindfulness. And so they go in and teach to the younger grades and lead their mindful moments. And it's really powerful. And it's much more powerful really than when I do it. So we have a lot of videos also on our website of our students, videos like that one with Alex teaching. And I think that's a great way to pass on these skills. So like so many of you, I suddenly started teaching online in March, and we did 10 weeks of distance learning, and then schools closed early. And then just a few days later, the Black Lives Matter protests started all over the country, including huge protests here in Washington, D.C. And I had been talking about racism and white privilege with my students in my classroom for several years now, especially since 2014 and after the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. But I hadn't really felt comfortable or confident about publishing these lessons up until last year. As a white person, I was nervous about saying the right thing, and I was unsure about how some of this work would be received outside of the kind of liberal bubble that is Washington, D.C., at least some parts of it. And I made some mistakes along the way as I tried to figure out how to talk about these difficult subjects with my students. But I really feel like we owe it to our children to be honest about what has happened and what is happening in our country. And it's not like they won't know about racism if we don't point it out. So I think that kids really need age-appropriate opportunities to process and understand what's happening. And really, unless we equip ourselves and our students to see and challenge systemic racism, nothing is going to change. So in the spirit of being vulnerable and humble and brave, last year we published a new curriculum for 4th and 5th graders. And this summer we're publishing a new curriculum for middle school. And they both have a much bigger focus on identity and racism. And, you know, things seem really different right now than they did just even a few months ago. And so we're really heartened to see that now there seems to be an opening and people are really hungry for this work. So we're offering these lessons with great humility and in the spirit of working and learning together. So can you go to the next one, Cheryl? So this is a quote from a teacher and thinker that I really admire named Dr. Bettina Love. And I'm just going to read it out loud just for if anybody isn't looking at their screen. To love all children, she says, we must struggle together to create the schools we are taught to believe are impossible. Schools built on justice, love, joy, and anti-racism. And I put this quote in here partly because I just love this sentiment, but also I really wanted to highlight some of the people who have been my teachers in this work, including Dr. Love and Dina Simmons and so many others. I really, really recommend that all of you watch this recent panel discussion on abolitionist teaching that features Dr. Love, Dina Simmons, and Goldie Muhammad. If you aren't inspired to revolutionize education after hearing these brilliant women, then I don't know what would convince you. We'll put a link to it in the chat. It's really, really worth watching. And, you know, there are resources and book lists going around. There's so many resources that it can feel kind of daunting. But the good news is that what we're talking about today, mindfulness, is something that's available to everyone right now. It's not expensive, it's not time consuming, and it'll support you and your students in so many ways. And you can start today. You go to the next one, Cheryl. Mm-hmm. So one of the ways that mindfulness can help with this work is, well, I guess I should read this. This is a quote by Anu Gupta, who founded an organization called Be More, and he works with corporations and larger institutions to help people to learn about and address their own implicit bias. And he says, mindfulness is merely the act of noticing whatever arises without judgment, whether it's a body sensation, emotion, feeling, or thought. I believe that mindfulness is the revolutionary tool we need to break unconscious bias and address racism. And his work is founded in many years of research. There's a law professor named Rhonda McGee who wrote a book called The Inner Work of Racial Justice, who also writes about the importance of this work, but also the science behind this work. So this really does work to help people to see, like I talked about earlier, that metacognition, to see what is happening in your own mind and then challenge that. So we're gonna do another practice now, and this is the sort of the foundational practice that I teach my students to start to develop these metacognition skills. And it goes by lots of different names, but in my class, I just call it remote control breathing. And I think that this is one of those practices that's a little bit easier to understand after you've tried it. So if you're willing, let's just give it a try. So all you're going to do is try to count your breaths for about 20 seconds. During this time, just try to notice if your mind gets distracted. And if it does, which is likely, then just start over again counting your breaths. Okay? You can close your eyes if you want to, but you don't have to. And when I say go, you're just going to try to count your breaths and just see what happens. There's no right way to count them. Any way you want to do it is fine. Ready? Go. Okay, stop. So you might want to post what you noticed in the chat. You might post if your mind stayed focused the whole time, or if you started to think about something else. Maybe you noticed you were hungry, or maybe you noticed you were tired, or you were annoyed that you had to do this practice. You know, whatever you notice, it's perfectly normal for our minds to just go off and do something else. And the reason that we call it remote control breathing is because I like to think of it as like there's like a little remote control in your mind. And even though you might choose a channel and you set an intention, like you're going to grade papers and you're on the grading papers channel, but while you're doing that, your mind might decide to change the channel to the what's for lunch channel. And oftentimes we don't even notice it. We just start thinking like, oh, I wonder what is for lunch. And you wander off. And then we kind of wonder like, why is it hard to stay focused on things? So this practice, when you do it over and over again, you start to get a lot better at noticing what your mind is doing, where your mind is going. And then when you notice it, then you have the power to make a choice. Is that what I want to do? Do I want to stay here? Do I want to go there? Do I want to think about this? You have a choice. It's really liberating. So we're going to talk a little bit now about some of the lessons that we teach that can help to address implicit bias. And this practice that we just did really is one that we do over and over again to kind of underlie these lessons. This is sort of more like the SEL aspect of the lessons, but the mindfulness piece is always there. So these are lessons that specifically address racism and implicit bias. And these are lessons you can currently find in our 4th and 5th grade curriculum. And they're going to be in the middle school curriculum that's coming out in August. We're working to adapt these lessons for younger grades because we have curriculum that starts from pre-K and goes up to middle school now. So, but I just want to quickly just run through these. I just want to check the time. One of the things that we do to sort of get started with talking about racism and bias is to talk about our own identities. And so one thing we do is we have the kids create an identity map. And it can be really important to understand your own identity and understand how your identity can be shaped by the culture that you live in, and really kind of try to understand what your relationship is to the dominant identity of your culture. So these identity maps are a really great starting point for discussion. The next one is something that I call the think test. And this is a really foundational lesson that we use throughout the curriculum. The think test is something that I made up based on a quote. I'm sure you've seen this quote. You know, it says something like, before you speak, ask yourself if what you're about to say is true, helpful, necessary, and kind. And if the answer is no, then maybe it should be left unsaid. So I used that. I just took those words out and noticed that they spelled think, sort of. And I use that as a little framework to help kids sort of grapple with some ethical issues and think about what they want to say. And I wrote a book about it. I've written 4 children's books, and this is one of them. It's called Tayasia Uses the Think Test. And that girl in the picture is actually Tayasia herself. All of the books that I've written and that we've published are based on lessons from my classroom, and they all feature the real students in my classes. So there's Tayasia. The next one, it is a lesson, a few lessons actually, about gender stereotypes. And so we start out our investigation of stereotypes by looking at gender stereotypes. And through skits and videos and discussion, we begin to notice where these ideas, like all girls like princesses, where they come from and how they can relate to who we are as individuals, and really see how harmful they can be and how they really hurt all of us. And again, we use our mindfulness practices to really think about what we've seen, what we've heard, where do we get these ideas. Then we do lessons on counter stereotypes, because once you've identified that you have bias, then you need to sort of build a new impression in your mind. And so counter stereotypes are extremely important. So if you have you know, if you held the idea that, you know, that there were no that girls weren't good at sports, you know, if you constantly keep looking at a picture of Serena Williams, like if that is the picture in your mind that comes up when you think about girls in sports, then that can start to change the way you think. So these images are extremely important, and it's really important to have these images up and around in our schools. Once we sort of establish the ideas, the foundations of identity and what stereotypes are, what bias means, we give kids a sort of, you know, tools to try to figure out and understand their own bias. Then we take it to some action, and we start to teach kids how to stand up for themselves and for other people when they hear bias, to really be interrupters. And they learn about microaggressions and what those are and what they mean and what you can do about it when you're confronted with them. We also this year did something that really made this work very real for our kids. We helped our students learn more about history and privilege and identity. By at our school this winter, we learned from some local historians that the very land that our school and the adjacent park and rec center were built on had been stolen by the government from Black people in the 1930s. And so we invited the historians who uncovered this history, as well as descendants of the original owners of the land, to visit our school and to talk to the kids about what happened. The kids were outraged, and they started a letter writing campaign, and they wrote to our mayor and our city council to demand that the recreation center, which was being rebuilt, be named after Captain George Pointer, who was the original owner of the land, and that reparations be made to his family. Sadly, it would be all too easy for educators in every part of the country to find stories similar to these, whether it be land stolen from people who were formerly enslaved or indigenous people. So I really encourage you to find ways to make this work real for your students and their communities. So Cheryl, you're going to talk now about what we've been hearing from teachers that we work with. I can't hear you, Cheryl. I think you might be muted. Oops. We still can't hear you though.
We had a conference last January where we bring together educators interested in doing this work and surveyed everyone who came to find out what they were interested in learning more about. So we were glad to hear that people were largely interested in applying mindfulness to social justice issues. We're interested in that too. We were also noticing and not surprised that many educators are keenly interested in trauma-sensitive mindfulness teaching for our kids. And one thing that is really clear is that we can't really do one without the other. And that's really helped us to evolve in our thinking and our studying and our understanding of how to meet these needs for educators so they can meet them for their kids. So let me just say we're interested in what you're interested in too, and what you want to know more about. This is what we found as a snapshot in our community, which we hope that you'll be part of. Here we are.
Yes, so Dina Simmons is the assistant director of the Yale Child Study Center, and she's an expert in social emotional learning. And she says, if we aren't addressing racism, we aren't addressing trauma. And I've learned so much from Dina Simmons' writing and speaking, and I really recommend you start to follow her and learn from her. Just her basic feeling about this is that everybody wants to be trauma informed, But the main thing that we need to inform ourselves and our kids about is the systemic nature of racism and white supremacy, and how they are the cause of much of the trauma that our kids are experiencing. So she says we can't just give kids the skills to cope with the effects of trauma, but we have to recognize the cause of the trauma. And when we focus on grit or growth mindset or resilience, we may inadvertently be giving our students the message that they are the problem. So even with really well-intended social emotional learning and mindfulness programs, we can harm our students if we aren't being honest about the world that we live in and the challenges that they're facing. So we have to do our own work. And I know this is a lot, but all of us, and especially white people, have to get comfortable talking about racism and racialized identity and white supremacy. We have to learn the history that isn't in our textbooks. Systemic racism hurts all of us, and it's learned. So we have to become aware of how we're inadvertently passing it on. And I'm sure you've all seen all the lists going around of all the books, and it's very overwhelming. Here's some that we like, but there are so many. And if you have suggestions that you'd like to share, please put them in the chat. But we can't just read, right? We have to take it in, and we have to take it into action in our classrooms and in our interactions with our students. So before I knew that Jamila Coase was going to be on this panel, I had already was going to quote her in my talk this morning, and I ended up not having enough time. But I think that she really sums this up so beautifully. She says, "Dear educators, it's not your job to save your students. Your job is to help them develop the skills and the tools they need in order to save themselves. And beyond that, your job is to help create a society from which they don't need saving." And I think that really kind of says it all. And I would, definitely recommend following Dr. Coase. She's fantastic. So she's really pointing out another trap that we, especially white teachers, can fall into. We need to be careful that our language and policies and attitudes don't perpetuate a system that is stacked against our students of color. And that is another reason why it's so important for us to do our own work. And I just want to say again, we present all of these ideas with great humility. And we really want to honor the teachers who've helped us along the way. We want to honor those people and those students who've forgiven us for the mistakes we've made along the way and the mistakes we continue to make as we try to do all this difficult and necessary work. And so we hope that you'll, if you're not already doing that, that you will be willing to go out on a limb and do it, because it's probably the most important thing we can do for our students right now. So this is a lot to take in, and so I thought we would do one more mindfulness practice. We're almost out of time. This is a practice that is that helps us to develop feelings of compassion for ourselves and for others, for people that we love and for people that we don't love. And it can be a really important part of doing this work. This is heart work. And so this is a practice that I do with my students a lot. And if you're willing, you might want to do this with us. No pressure. So for this practice, you can close your eyes or keep them open. It's totally up to you. If you keep your eyes open, you might just want to look down into your lap. We usually like to put our hands over our heart when we do this. Again, totally optional. And let's just take a deep breath. Just breathing in and breathing out. And we always start this practice by sending a little love to ourselves. So I'm going to ask you just to think about yourself, and I'm going to say some words out loud. And if you want to, you can just repeat them in your mind or whisper them softly to yourself. Sometimes it's hard for us to be kind to ourselves. This is very challenging for some of my students and some adults that I know. It does get easier with practice. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live in peace. You might just notice how that lands with you. It might make you feel good or weird or nothing. It's all fine. Now I'd like you to think about somebody that you love. Just pick one person and just hold them in your heart and your mind. And just think these words as you think about this person. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live in peace. Now, maybe you might like to think about one of your students. There's usually a few that really stick out in your mind. Just choose one. I'm going to think about Joshua, who's here in this picture. Let's just send some love to that special student. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live in peace. And then we close by sending some love to each other, to all of us. May we all be safe. May we all be happy. May we all be healthy. May we all live in peace. And if you want to, you can take another deep breath, just breathing in and breathing out. Thanks for trying that practice with us. Cheryl's going to talk a little bit more about how you can be in touch with us and our resources. And then if we have a few minutes, we'd love to hear some of your questions.
Definitely. We are all learning, we're growing, and we hope that you'll grow with us by connecting to our community and sharing what you know and what you've learned with us along the way. Our curriculum is available. As we mentioned, the first 3 volumes really lay the foundation for the work that we've talked about today: mindfulness, brain science, social emotional learning, conflict resolution. 4th and 5th grade and our upcoming middle school can take you a little farther. The books we have, there are 4 others on the way to help bring the lessons home, and resources to help you in your classroom. What we keep most current is our website. And so here is the website page for educators, website page for everyone, but there's a section for educators. So please check this out. It's here for you. We keep it updated for you. we hope it's useful to you, especially in the fall as we all start back into this hybrid form of education. That's where we are. This is how to reach us. We hope you'll get in touch. We'd really love to stay in touch. So thank you for your kind attention this whole time. And we do have a few minutes. I think we end at 2:50. Thank you for your kind comments too. So do you have any questions? Just pop them in the chat and we'll see what we can do. We have about 7 minutes to go. Or thoughts, or anything you'd like to share with the community. That's all good too.
Cheryl, our friend Maria from Sweden is here.
I noticed that. I'm so glad.
Hello, Maria.
That's quite something. Yeah. Says, here's one question from Meg. Any recommendations or ideas for implementing small elements of mindfulness with older kids, 12th graders?
Yeah, it's interesting. I find that whether I'm teaching 9-year-olds or 39-year-olds, I don't really do it that differently. The practices that we did today would be really useful for somebody in 12th grade, the same way they are for adults. It's sometimes helpful to explain the neuroscience to older kids so that they really kind of understand, and they're not as, they're not going to be as willing to just buy into it as little kids are. But we met recently with a coach and his track team, and they were all 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And when we first came in, they were all kind of on their phones and they were a little bit like, But when we started talking about the brain science and talking about sort of helping them understand what happens in your brain when you get angry and when you get nervous or right before a big race, and how mindfulness practice could help them with that, then they started to kind of look up and they were like, oh, okay, this sounds interesting. And so I think that it's not that hard. You just have to sort of make it relevant to them. There's a really great video. I don't have a link to it, but it's called Under Pressure. And it's really about addressing like the intense stress that teenagers are under, and then just showing how mindfulness practices can help with that. And so I think things like that, a video, sometimes links to celebrities or famous athletes who practice mindfulness can be really helpful too, in making it seem like something that older teens would be interested in. But I haven't really had that much trouble convincing people to do it once we kind of explain what it is. And like Cheryl said earlier, like we're just presenting this. It's just completely secular brain training and talking about emotions. It's not anything woo-woo or weird.
So Linda, there's a few more questions. One, I think, which is timely for all of us, is do you have any recommendations? Emily's asking about starting this practice with new kindergartners virtually in the fall. So how do we do this?
Yeah. So I start with first graders. So and our colleague who wrote our early childhood curriculum at my school teaches the kindergarten and first graders. Really what it seems to work a lot with them is just making like simple, fun practices. Like there's a book that I like using called Alpha Breaths, and it has a little mindfulness practice for every letter of the alphabet. A is for alligator breath. And these are like the kinds of things that we would do in class. I'd have the kids make up their own way of breathing, like wave breathing, breathe in and breathe out, and breathe in and breathe out, or tree breathing, and they'd be a tree, just like little I mean, you know, if you teach early childhood, like, you know what appeals to them. So just trying to put these little simple mindfulness practices in language that they would understand. There are lots of resources and there's a lot of resources on our website about this, and in our curriculum. But again, it's not that different, really. Like, the practices are basically the same. So just the way we talk about them is a little bit different for depending on the age group.
We have just a couple minutes. There's another question from Cheryl about how did your role as a peace educator come to be? Especially, I would add, in a DC public school.
Yeah, it's a long time coming, but I was actually a music teacher, and I started getting more interested in conflict resolution and peace education. And when my kids were in elementary school, when they were young, I volunteered to teach a class about conflict resolution in my daughter's 3rd grade class. And it became kind of conflict resolution and sort of more traditional peace studies. And we did a lot of focus on like being kind to each other and that kind of stuff. And I just started, that class became popular, and I teach at a very large school. So we have 6 3rd grade classes. So what happened in one class quickly became what they wanted me to teach at the peace class in all the classes. And so it just kind of grew like that. I started as a volunteer, and when it was part-time, then I became full-time, and now I'm an employee of the school system with the title of peace teacher. I think I'm the only one. So yeah, it was kind of a long, slow process, but this was before, people were talking about mindfulness all the time. So I think people are a lot more open to this work now, especially right now. This is a great time if you're thinking about pitching a mindfulness-based SEL program in your school. Like, this is a great time because suddenly everybody's talking about the importance of social emotional learning, and these are skills that the kids really need, especially when they're at home.
Yeah. Okay, one really quickly. In addition to Dan Siegel, are there any other brain science resources you'd recommend for high schoolers?
High schoolers.
About that myself.
What?
Go ahead.
Do you have an answer?
I was wondering about also Dan Harris and some of his videos about
yeah,
mindfulness meditation.
Yeah, Dan Harris, if you don't know, he's a anchor man on Good Morning America, and he was on Nightline. But his sort of other job is teaching and about mindfulness, and so he's written a book about it. It's called 10% Happier, which I highly recommend. He has a podcast that's all about mindfulness. It's just fantastic. He interviews everybody like practically everything I've learned about mindfulness. I feel like I've learned from that. He also has an app for if you're interested in learning about mindfulness. I highly recommend it. It has so many great teachers on it. I think my son is in college, just graduated from college, but he started practicing when he was in college. He didn't want to do it when it was coming from me, of course, but it became his own practice, and he really got a lot out of apps that I think, so I think apps that are for adults would be pretty appropriate for teens. Dan Siegel's written books about the teenage brain. I'm not 100% sure that I can think of a great resources for teaching teens. It's just not something I've done, but I'm going to think about that. We have one lesson in the curriculum for middle school about the fast and slow systems in the brain, and yeah, I'm not sure I have a better recommendation than that. For younger kids, I did write a book about it called Rosie's Brain, and it's a book that helps kids understand and learn about the parts of your brain that are most involved when you get angry: the amygdala, prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus. And it's a storybook that our books are all recorded, and they're on our website too. So if you're interested in checking those out.
Yeah, and the Spanish version of Rosie's Brain will be out this fall. That's really exciting.
Yeah.
But I think we're at our time. I'm sorry to say. 2:50. Yeah. Thank you all so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it. And we hope you'll stay in touch. If you have questions we didn't answer, please email us. The information's here on the screen and we will respond, I promise. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. Hope to meet you all someday.
Yeah. Enjoy the closing talk. I think it would be wonderful.